Hello, class. This is my audience, my dad. There we go, yeah. Let me take you back in time a few weeks ago when I decided to make one of my favorite treats. Yes, I'm talking about that delicious rice ball, or in this case, rice rectangle, wrapped in seaweed, with one extraordinary ingredient. I'm talking about Spam Musubi. Tasting the delicious combination of spam, rice, and seaweed made me think about the hard times that this dish stems from. Spam Musubi's rich history is often looked over, be seen as a simple handcrafted snack from Hawaii. But its history goes deeper than that. Spam is a symbol of American generosity in helping feed people, and it is also a reminder of immense suffering. Growing up, when I would come home to the wonderful smell of spam cooking throughout the air in my house, I would be filled with excitement and eagerness of dinner. I grew up thinking that my mom came up with this groundbreaking recipe of making sushi out of spam. But as I grew older, I realized although my mom didn't come up with the recipe, she was adding to the culture, just like many have done so in the past. First, I'll talk about the origins of spam in the Hawaiian Islands. Then I'll discuss the creation of spam musubi. Lastly, I'll discuss the stigma behind spam. Spam was first introduced to the Pacific Islands during World War II. Following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the American military was stationed in the Pacific. This meant that troops made their way to places like Guam, Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea. And as stated in the Time magazine article by Ang Lee, wherever American troops went, spam followed. After the war ended, spam stuck around in places with prolonged American military presence. On some Pacific islands, spam became a necessity for survival due to the food rationing and restrictions that come about with war. For many Japanese Americans, spam comes from a time of hate and pain. From 1942 to 1945, the U.S. government sent spam to incarceration camps where people of Japanese descent were forced to relocate to. Thinking about it, spam was the perfect food for military rationing. It requires no refrigeration, it's easy to transport, and it's easy to prepare. This was the beginning of spam's popularity during the war. Now we talked about how spam made its way into the Pacific, but let's dive deeper into the history of the spam musubi. Now with Japanese Americans making up about 12.6% of Hawaii's population, according to a 2014 Mr. Lin's Kitchen article, it was not at all surprising when Japanese and Hawaiian cultures influenced one another, especially when it came to the cuisine. Spam musubi stems from the Japanese food known as onigiri, the traditional Japanese rice ball snack, which originated back during the 11th century. Spam musubi draws inspiration from this, being a rice ball, or in this case, a rice rectangle wrapped in nori, dried seaweed. This beautiful connection between these two cultures is what makes spam musubi very special to many. It showcases the multi-ethnic and multicultural diversity of Hawaii, and as stated in the Food and Wine article, they cook together, they have to live together, they have to put up with each other, and many of them intermarried. This grew into its own cuisine. As many of you may know, there's a stigma behind spam, it being labeled a poor man's food. Well, I'd like to dive deeper into that. Spam had not only made its way into the Asia-Pacific islands, but it was also introduced to Britain in the post-war years. During the economic hardships that followed the war, spam was seen as an affordable alternative to fresh meat in Britain. However, unlike the Asian Pacific, they were quick to recover economically. Thus, spam's popularity there quickly died out. Britain contributed to many of the stereotypes people have about spam nowadays, notably due to the Monty Python sketch about spam. Spam is still seen to this day as a poor man's meal. Personally, I remember hearing from people this exact same stigma when bringing up spam into a conversation. Hopefully, if you did, you no longer view spam musubi as a simple snack from Hawaii, but rather see its importance in Asian American culture and the hard times it stems from. We talked about how spam made its way into the Asian Pacific Islands during the Second World War, the creation of spam musubi, and the stigma behind spam. Taking you back in time to a few weeks ago when I made spam musubi, you are now filled with the same historical knowledge that fills my synapses. Hopefully, you decide to see what I've been preaching about and have some Spam Azubi if you haven't tried it yet.